Hello and welcome to Lesson 15, Fiscal Policy. Today we're going to talk about macroeconomics. Macroeconomics has to deal with the economy as a whole. Macroeconomic equilibrium seeks to balance through supply and demand. Aggregate supply and demand help us study supply and demand for the economy as a whole. Supply and demand tools help determine equilibrium price and the quantity of output. Aggregate supply is the total value of goods and services that all firms would produce in a specific period of time at various price levels. It's over a 1 year period. And over a 1 year period, if all production takes place within the country's borders, aggregate supply will equal GDP. Decreases in the cost of production tend to increase aggregate supply, and increases in the cost of production tend to decrease aggregate supply. Aggregate demand is the total demand for every good and service in the economy at different price levels. The aggregate demand curve represents the sum of demand for all economic sectors at their varying price levels. When aggregate demand increases, spending is increased and the curve shifts to the right. But when people save more and spend less, aggregate spending is reduced and the curve shifts to the left. Macroeconomic equilibrium is reached when a level of real GDP is consistent with a given price level. Aggregate supply and demand curves can be used together to analyze how proposed policies might affect growth and price stability. Macroeconomic equilibrium is at the point of intersection between the aggregate supply curve and the aggregate demand curve. Macroeconomic equilibrium can change as a result of changes in either aggregate supply or aggregate demand. Demand-side policies affect aggregate demand, while supply-side policies affect aggregate supply. Our economy needs a combination of both demand-side and supply-side policies. Demand-side policies are designed to affect total demand through taxing, government spending, and automatic stabilizers. Demand-side policies are designed to increase or decrease the total demand for the economy. Its fiscal policy is derived from Keynesian economics. Keynesian economics is an approach of fiscal policy designed to lower unemployment by stimulating aggregate demand. The Keynesian framework is the aggregate output expenditure model. That looks like this: GDP equals C plus I plus G plus F. F is equal to X minus M. All of these just stand for different areas of our economic sectors. During the Great Depression, Keynesian concluded that unstable spending by investment businesses caused the GDP to decline. Keynesian identified a multiplier effect in which unstable spending by investment sectors had magnified the effect on the total economy. Keynesian identified an accelerator, the change of investment spending caused by a change of overall spending. Together, that multiplier and accelerator pushed the GDP into a deep and fast downward spiral. Keynesian concluded that the problem during the Great Depression was a lack of spending, so he encouraged the government, the only sector large enough to spend in order to offset the changes in investment spending. Keynesian justified temporary federal deficits as a necessity to stop further declines in economic activity. In the 1960s, economists suggested priming the pump, thinking that a small amount of government spending would initiate a bigger round of overall spending in our economy. A key component to demand-side policies is automatic stabilizers. Automatic stabilizers automatically trigger benefits if changes in the economy threaten income. These include unemployment insurance and some entitlement programs. Recognition, legislation, and implementation lags prevent the government from responding to economic issues as quickly as Keynesian envisioned. People may become increasingly dependent on federal government rather than use their own skills and initiative. A tipping point will eventually occur when people decide that the burden of taxes needed to finance government expenditures outweigh their benefits. Even after the economy recovers, politicians have never been able to fully cut back on government spending during a decline in investment spending. So now let's look at the supply side economy. The supply side policies are designed to stimulate output, increasing production. It was popular with Reagan's administration. The net effect of President Reagan's budget prioritized was 2.5% of increase in government spending. The economy during Reagan's administration partly supported the supply side claims that reduced government regulation would provide strong economic growth. But because military spending is also created an economic stimulus, the growth was not entirely due to supply side economy. Contrary, the supply side expectations, tax cuts by both Reagan and Bush resulted in the fall of revenues. Many economists believe that supply side policies have made the economy less stable, but supply side policies are designed to promote economic growth. They are not meant to create a price stability. Supply side economies and demand side policies both have some goal of increasing production and decreasing unemployment without increasing inflation. The government can influence the economy with directionary, passive, or structural fiscal policies. Current conditions shape and view the economists and policymakers. Supply-side policies target producers to stimulate their output, thereby providing jobs. Demand-side policies began to falter in the 1970s, and in 1981, supply-side policies became the hallmark of President Reagan's administration. A key role for supply-side policies is to reduce the economic role of the federal government. Supply-side policies attempt to reduce the federal tax burden on individuals and businesses, which theoretically allow them to spend more and produce more goods. The Laffer curve predicted an increase in tax revenue in spite of lower taxes, but this benefit was never materialized. Supply-siders support deregulation and the relaxation or removal of government regulations restricting the activities of certain industries. That is the end of lesson 15. Make sure that you turn in all your reading notes and take your mastery check.